think all 8 members of the board are a test for staff every day.
Okay, but Brian, you do have a quorum of the storage committee when we get going.
Okay, I got about 1 minute till, so we'll wait a minute and then go.
Okay.
So before we start, Marc Gibbs, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
How are you today? This is Ken Roberts. Did you get your potatoes planted yet?
We've planted for 3 days, Ken. We're about a fourth done. We're not planting today. So it's a little wet. Not wet enough, but a little wet. We haven't got as much rain as everybody else has. It's gone around us and no snow yet. So we'd take a good rain.
Good for you.
The guy, potato farmer on my farm, Mark, planted a month ago, and I dug a couple up yesterday, and they got little tiny sprouts on them.
I imagine
It's just been cold.
It's pretty typical for us. You go back and every day or so it'll pop up on Facebook a memory from 7 years or 5 years. Or, if we get started planting the first week of May, we're in pretty good shape here.
Okay, well, it's 10 o'clock, so this is Chairman Olmstead, and I'll call the meeting to order. And we'll start off with a roll call and introductions, I guess. Jennifer?
Chairman Olmstead.
Here.
Mr. Barker. He's muted, but I see he's there. Ms. Cole-Hansen.
You want me to unmute myself too? Boy, that's really
Thanks, Al. Mr. Gibbs.
Here.
Mr. Raybould.
Here.
And that is our committee.
And then we have other board members that are not part of the storage committee here with Pat McMahon and Dean Stevenson. And then I'll just ask Jennifer to keep attendance of staff and guests that are here at the meeting.
Okay, welcome to everybody who's in the house there and on Zoom. And it looks like first order of business is the Upper Payette. So is that you, Norm?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can kick off. Norm Semenko with Parsons Bailey. Our firm represents the Upper Payette Storage Water Association, and we've got a number of our folks here. I see the Water Master, District 65 is here as well. So, or 67, sorry, is here as well. So why don't we, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, ask these folks to introduce themselves, starting with Ken.
Sure. Thanks, Norm. Ken Roberts, live up in the Donley area. We've farmed up there for almost 125 years and have water on the Gold Fork Irrigation Company. And I also serve as chairman of the Gold Fork Irrigation Company. And we're thankful for your audience today.
And it's Monday. We did have a break the first time at 65, so sorry.
Phil Davis, I live in Cascade. Have been buying stored water since the 80s for Water District 65. And feeling not too secure about it. That's why we're here, hoping we can buy our own storage. We had an opportunity once, but we were in a lawsuit with Idaho Power with the Bureau involved in it and weren't able to because of that. And so that was our only opportunity and we're hoping for one.
I'm Ron Shurtleff. I served as Water Master for Water District 65 for 20 years. I'm here helping the Upper Payette water users try to get ownership of storage. My capacity is helping them by their request, actually. I do farm. I'm on the Payette, Lower Payette ditch, and we've been farming there for over 130 years.
Scott Nicholson, Gold Fork Irrigation Water, Kinley Creek Irrigation Water. I'm a vice chair of Gold Fork Irrigation District. So that's where our water is being used up there on a couple different ranches.
Larry Craig, interested party.
Lee Nichols, also from Cascade, and we've been buying water from District 65 about the same time Bill has.
Neil Shippey, Water District 65 Water Master.
All right, so any other preliminaries you guys need, Brian?
No, we're good.
I don't know if we can pull up the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Possible. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, we have a short PowerPoint. Most of you have, if not all of you, have seen this or a version of this. So we're here today because there's a huge need for storage water in the Payette River Basin. We can see the train coming. You all are painfully aware, maybe painfully is not the right word, very aware of the challenges that come with administration of water rights. And as new folks get added to the administration equation, there become challenges. So we've got a water supply challenge coming at us in the Upper Payette, but we also have a huge opportunity, right? So when you need additional water to help deal with administration needs, there aren't always great options or options that require a lot of planning, money, construction, etc. Here we have a great opportunity, which is uncontracted water in the Payette Basin. Just by way of comparison, I'm sure you guys know this, but in the upper Snake above Milner, there's 4.1 million acre feet of storage and 29,000 acre feet, maybe a little less now, of uncontracted storage. So not a huge opportunity there. Here, of course, the Payette has quite a bit less storage than that, around 1 million acre feet, if I recall correctly, and pretty huge chunks of uncontracted storage, not all of which is obligated to flow augmentation under the Nez Perce agreement. And that was identified, as we'll talk about in a little bit here, during the negotiations on the Nez Perce agreement. So that's who we are, the Upper Payette Storage Water Association. We've been meeting for quite a while. We've done due diligence, we've done research. We've even met with the Bureau of Reclamation, the regional director, and her team and folks from the solicitor's office. Late January, had 2 months of discussions and contemplation with Matt and others in the legal shop, Howard over at Reclamation, even before that meeting. And they're waiting patiently, I think, to hear what the next step might be in moving forward on this idea. So if we go to the next slide. Next one, please. So what are the reasons to contract for storage space? First of all, in Cascade, there is in the neighborhood of 17,000 acre feet of uncontracted storage that is dedicated to irrigation and municipal uses. And that's been identified. There is an additional 22,000 acre feet or so in Deadwood that's in probably a different category, but we wanted to make you all aware of that opportunity as well. This is storage, obviously, that's built, that's been authorized for certain purposes in the water district, and is ostensibly available through the right processes for contracting. Again, the reasons include enlarged administration by Water District 65 to include the Payette River tributaries. And these water rights on the tributaries are now going to be identified and accounted for as storage users when they run out of their natural flow. If they don't have storage, they've got to find it somewhere. And these folks might want to talk about that. I think I'm going to ask Ron if he wants to add anything, maybe the water master, and then certainly the users around here who see that challenge coming at them with administration. If I could pause there, Ron.
Yeah, of course, the load has always been on the system. The tributary users have been using water throughout the history of water accounting in the Payette Basin, but they have not been included in the system. So the tributaries were just ignored basically up to this point, even though they were using water out of the system. What this will do will allow, if we can secure this water for them, it will give water for mitigation. In other words, the water that they use in exchange will be made available by storage water that will be coming from their own accounts. And that's the reason for this, is that they were left out of the original conversations when contracts were given. So they never did have the opportunity to acquire storage. And at the time, the Bureau of Reclamation didn't have the opportunity to know how water accounting was going to treat the district either. Now we know quite a little bit about that. I will admit we're still learning a lot about the Payette, and I think we are with most basins, but nevertheless, this is obvious that these folks will need to mitigate for the injury to the natural flow rights that they would create downstream once they are brought into the accounting system. And that's the main reason that I think that the equitable thing would be to put storage in these folks' names, in the water users' names.
These next three bullets are things that we emphasized to the Bureau when we met with them. This, as Ron already said, this isn't going to alter stream flows. The use already exists. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be covered by storage that's owned, or whether they're going to have to dip it in the rental pool or whatever. I don't know how else they could cover it. But of course, the rental pool procedures prioritize in-basin storage over flow augmentation. So we all know that in any particular year, the Bureau is competing to get water from willing sellers, willing renters in the rental pool, whether that's in the Payette or the Upper Snake or wherever. And when there's a greater demand by irrigators, which there will be for that rental pool water, it's going to make it more difficult to get water for flow augmentation, because they're going to need that to cover their uses in any particular year as irrigators. That's a huge point that we emphasize with them. Also, the supplemental water, of course, would avoid reliance on the rental pool, because they would be through subcontract, probably, however this would be set up, would be owners or have permanent storage to use, and wouldn't need to dip into the rental pool in any particular year and compete with the needs under the flow augmentation program, which I think you can see the tension there. Next slide, please. All right, so folks around the table can talk about the association. It's an umbrella group meant to serve a large group of users, including the irrigators and municipal providers in the area, like McCall, Cascade, and Horseshoe Bend. And as Ron has already articulated, they're looking for what he's called an equal opportunity to access federal storage, similar to the folks in the other parts of the basin who already have taken advantage of the opportunity earlier in time to contract for storage to supplement their natural flow. And that's really what we're looking for as the best supply option for these guys. The storage is already there. It's already been constructed. It's available. Do you guys want to add anything about your association, what you're hoping to achieve for the folks in the basin?
Well, I would bring up that we ourselves and Pancary's branches have been buying water because we're on the main stem since the 80s. And it was we felt pretty secure in that it was $3.50 an acre foot, which was not, that was okay. As soon as they decided to administer the upper reaches, they moved it to $7 an acre foot, with the understanding that the very next year, which would have been this year, which has not happened, but the intent was to go to $14 an acre foot. And I'll say that most of this water in Valley County is used for pasture. It's not for high dollar crops. And if we have to compete for 14 or above that, it gets almost prohibitive, if not prohibitive. So we went to Valley County commissioners and asked them for financial help to hire Norm and Ron to help us get that, which Valley County did, with the understanding that if this became too expensive, then people were going to let that dry up and more than likely would sell for development or other opportunities, which would take away the open space, which Valley County recognized was very likely the consequence of this. So with the help of Norm and Ron, to identify this space, it will be a big asset to Valley County if we can get this purchased and have the security that it's not gonna become prohibitive to keep that agricultural up there and keep the open space, which Valley County was very receptive to.
You want to talk to the municipal needs too, Ron?
Yes, I'd like to also add a little bit about the reasoning behind the association. In prior conversations with the Bureau of Reclamations, I was informed that the Bureau was not really keen about contracting to a bunch of little individuals, users, but they would consider if the group would get together and form an association to where they could handle this under one contract and then let the association divide the water equitably to the users as the need arose, that they might be open to this, just to that. And so that's the reasoning behind the association. And we put that together basically so that we could go to the Bureau with a request. And in my years of serving as water master, I had many times heard from the municipals, which were usually McCall and Horseshoe Bend. They were always concerned about the security of their water. They felt they were in a situation where they were dependent upon the generosity, basically, of a downstream user, and they felt it would be much better off for them, of course, if they could get storage that was dedicated directly to their usage. During my time, I was always reassuring them that it was going to be available, but as things change, and attitudes change, I began to wondering if I was maybe stretching the truth a little bit. And so I felt a little greater need to try to get that water in there and dedicated to their usage.
So if we go to the next slide. So here are the numbers that I mentioned earlier. The uncontracted Cascade space that's committed to irrigation and municipal uses is a 16,747. Ron, how much water do we need for the upcoming forecasted needs? Is it somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 or?
Yeah, we originally thought that 20,000 would cover it. One thing that the association does is the association can maintain the full amount that we can get under contract. I think it's affordable but the group is going to be growing as the administration of water grows. And it's not going to be an instant thing. We're not going to see that happen in 1 or 2 years. I think it's going to be over a several year period. But we kind of feel like, and it's kind of a rough estimate, but through my years of serving, I recognized that each irrigated acre was usually having to rent about 1 acre foot per acre. And that's about the acreage, about 20,000 that we cover here. And so that's really why we're thinking that 20,000 might be sufficient for this first situation. As the accounting continues to move throughout the basin, then there may be a need for more.
So the more is this uncontracted space in Deadwood, which is in a different category, and we didn't spend much time talking with the Bureau about that, but I would almost consider that phase 2 on top of the contracted space. I did want to mention that this is separate, and this was my immediate concern when I heard about this, from the uncontracted space that's available for flow augmentation under the Nez Perce agreement. So there's a fair amount of uncontracted water in the basin. As I already mentioned, the idea is that this would actually improve supply for flow augmentation by avoiding increased rental pool demand. And as we were talking to the Bureau, we wanted to emphasize the fact that, this water was built for a specific, space was built for a specific purpose, and this would help fulfill those responsibilities. So one of the things that I dove into is this even possible? Compared notes with Matt Howard. And I think it's safe to say that at the meeting on January 31st at the Bureau, the regional director saw a path and their team saw a path. We see a path. So let's go to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, this was discussed in the Nez Perce agreement, the ability to contract for additional supplies from the projects. And there is specific language in the biological opinion, which of course this biological opinion is through 2034. There's a couple of provisions. One that says that new contracts, you need to, the Bureau, look at salmon flow augmentation as being dependent on water rentals, we know that, which are variable and insecure. Due to this variability, reclamation must consult with NOAA prior to issuing a new contract that would reduce stream flows or reduce reclamation's ability to meet salmon flow augmentation commitments. Now pause there and say, we don't think this does that, but we're pretty sure they're going to consult anyway, particularly based on the next section, as described in its proposed action, or whenever reclamation otherwise determines the listed salmon or steelhead species or critical habitat may be affected. And then the next slide is the last one. This is really small type, but basically says the same thing in more detail, saying, if you're going to do a new contract, you need to talk to NOAA and figure out how this is all going to work for the flow augmentation and fish requirements. So there's those two sections in the buyout to speak to this. There is a pathway forward. As we wrapped up the meeting with the Bureau, Jennifer asked us to submit a formal proposal. We kind of already submitted our idea in writing to 3.5. But the idea was that once a formal proposal was received, that they would send us a cost recovery agreement. So this is all eating a pretty big elephant, which can only be done one bite at a time. And some folks are better at, more experienced at eating elephants than others. We haven't really had much experience as an association in eating the elephant. So it occurred to us as we were thinking, and we got on the phone with Brian to just kind of spitball this, that this organization, the board, and this committee have had opportunity to look at ways to acquire additional storage, even building additional storage on Anderson, and that this really is in that same vein, dealing with challenges that are out there, an opportunity that presents itself to contract uncontracted storage, reservoir that's already built, that's already been dedicated for these specific purposes. And, you know, the challenge is moving forward with that process, which you guys have been hip deep in with Anderson, and I'm sure other examples that aren't occurring to me right now. That's the challenge, is the price of the water, whether it's contracted directly from the Bureau, whether it's contracted subcontract through the board, like Anderson set up, or however it's done, is feasible for the end users. The environmental costs to see if this water can be acquired and to move forward with that process under NEPA and ESA is, we haven't asked for the number yet, but we're pretty sure it's eye-popping and not going to be achievable. So we start thinking, yeah, we've got an umbrella group, but is this bigger than the little Upper Payette Storage Association? Is this really something that on a statewide priority basis would make sense for the water board to talk about? And Brian said, yeah, let's get a small group together and talk about it. So we did that, and obviously now we're here in front of the committee and hopeful that it can go to the full board level for additional discussion. I'm sure by now Brian and staff have had opportunity to think about this, Brian Patton, and you as members of the board that were involved in those small group discussions as to whether this is attractive, whether it's feasible, whether it's something that we collectively should take a hard look at. I guess I'm at the place where I feel like there could be a handoff, but it's probably a handoff where the guy that hands the ball off to you gets out front and starts blocking for you. And that this group is not wanting to walk away. They want to be involved in whatever capacity they possibly can. And obviously at the end of the day, would like to be able to be the vehicle to subcontract for that water if the board were to hold the contract with the Bureau for this currently uncontracted water. All right, so that's my spiel. What did I miss, guys? Do you want to add before? I'm sure we've got questions from the committee members.
I think the obvious thing here is how many problems this will solve and the logic behind it. I think that logically that reservoir was built for this purpose, and there's just no reason. It's kind of an oversight in my mind that it was not appropriately spread out to the water users of the area. And now that we've got the complication of the Endangered Species Act to work around, I think we probably need assistance to get what should have been done a long time ago accomplished.
I think it's also an additional tester for the viability of the Nez Perce agreement. This is something that was contemplated 20 years ago when the agreement was being entered into. And you guys are aware of contracts that have been done, so it is possible. And the Bureau at the highest level that we've talked to, the regional director has said that there's a path. They can see a path. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but that's our pitch. That's the idea. And we're happy to answer questions, hear your feedback. And I see you got a little asterisk on your agenda, which is great. So appreciate it.
Okay, this is the chairman. I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions to members of the storage committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Al.
So I got a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is, since we're talking about ESA, there are other listed species besides salmon and steelhead that we have to worry about, right? There are bull trout. Are there others that would be involved in a consultation on this?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Member Barker, we do know that bald eagles have been an issue on Cascade in the past, but I don't think that's an issue anymore. I think there are some issues potentially that I'm not fully aware of at Deadwood, but in terms of what we're talking about in Cascade, I'm looking to Ron, see if we've identified any other critters. Obviously, the Bureau would need to reach out to both services to ask that, but
I don't call any.
Yeah, there were none that immediately came up. There were a few. There was a question about potential impacts on water quality that came up, but nothing concrete.
There were questions about that, but I think we reassured them that we were not going to change the water level of the reservoir, not going to change the stream flows down below the reservoir or throughout the system, that they recognize that water quality would not be an issue.
So, so maybe I didn't not sure I heard the answer, but are bull trout part of the consultation? So we have to loop in Fish and Wildlife as well as NOAA?
So Albert, we don't know that. It didn't come up during the discussion with the Bureau, but if that is critical habitat, if that is where species reside, then I am sure the Bureau will have to reach out to Fish and Wildlife Service, just as it would with NOAA, and determine whether consultation is necessary, formal or informal. So I'm quite sure that will need to be part of the process for the Bureau to reach out to them. But that wasn't specifically identified when we spoke with them.
So so if I understand what you're saying, is the full scope of what the Bureau would have to do in the way of ESA consultations has not been determined.
No, that's correct.
Okay. So the other question I've got is, and Norm, as you know, we've been looking at the Nez Perce agreement for purposes of to what extent do we want to renew it, if at all. And I was looking at the provision on the Payette where it says that there will be 30,000 acre feet made available for irrigation purposes outside of the 95,000 that's used for flow off. But it also says that the 30,000 acre feet will only be made available in certain types of water years when there's less than a forecasted 700,000 acre feet at Horseshoe Bend. So how does, if you turn over ownership of the storage that is used for that 30,000 acre feet to the water users, how does that trigger work? And what I'm worried about, interested in finding out is what the reclamation thinks and what the water users think about whether or not that's a situation that would require either modification or some other changes to the Nez Perce agreement.
Yeah, there was no discussion about that during the meeting that we had. It wasn't identified as a constraint on this opportunity to acquire the 17,000 or so acre feet of uncontracted in Cascade. So, we've had one meeting, a great hour-and-a-half meeting with the Bureau, but I'm not going to pretend we ran all of these issues to ground. We did identify the same provisions in the agreement with regard to new contracts, and both sides seem to agree that there's a path forward. And then they instantly jumped to cost recovery agreement. So they can't obviously do anything until they move forward with that. But great questions to be added to the list of things to figure out. And when I said earlier that the full plate of Endangered Species Act issues haven't been identified, I'm speaking from what we've heard. I don't know how much work the Bureau's done internally. They spent 2 months working this up for the regional director before they met with us. So I don't know how in detail they've gone internally into looking at this. I'm sure they didn't share everything that they've looked at with us during that meeting.
Okay. And
Great
then,
questions.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask one more, please?
Go ahead, Mr. Barker.
So tell me about this cost recovery. Is this similar to what reclamation is requiring out of Cat Creek or before they will even do any work on evaluating the proposal?
Yeah, Mr. Barker, I'm not familiar with the details of Cat Creek, but yeah, if you're going to move forward with a contracting activity, Gail and those folks over the Bureau need cost recovery agreement beforehand, whether, in my experience, you're looking at a renewal of a water service contract in the Columbia Basin project, or whether you're looking at a contract for additional space at Anderson, or whether it's contracting uncontracted space. It involves a contract. Under the reclamation manual, they have to recover those costs, and their vehicle for doing that is a cost recovery agreement. We've not seen one. We've not requested one. We don't know what the numbers are. I don't know if they've even calculated what the numbers are yet, but it was apparent to us that that was the next step in the process for them to calculate and determine what that might be.
So that would include all the ESA costs that you were mentioning and other hydrologic evaluations that the Bureau would feel would need to go through.
And NEPA, that's my understanding, yes.
And NEPA. Yeah, okay.
Questions from other committee members?
Chair, this is Joanne. I have a question.
Go ahead, Ms. Cole-Hansen.
Norm, do you have any indication of how the water will be split up? I know that you said that you're looking at 20,000 acre feet and 1 acre foot per acre, but then there's the needs of the city, the municipalities. Is that included in the 20,000? Will they need additional water, or how do you plan to allocate the portion to the municipalities versus irrigation?
Ron, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, we've got a pretty good idea of what the city's usage is right now because we've got a history of their rental water. The cities would be within that 20,000. In fact, we kind of think that if we were successful in getting the 16,747, that we could make that work for quite a while. But the city's usage, we do have a handle on that pretty well, and they will fit within that quite comfortably.
Ron, do you think it's hundreds or thousands of acre feet, or?
I think the city of McCall is around 500 acre feet per acre right now. And if I was suggesting to them whether to buy in at, I would say 1,000 acre feet is what they'd want to buy in at. If they came to us and had great expansion plans, we may want to change that. The city of Horseshoe Bend is quite modest. a couple 100-acre feet would probably put them in a pretty secure situation. The reason they're so uneasy, of course, is if they can't rent some year, you know, the alternative looks a little grim. As history has shown, though, that would be the last ones that we would shut off. So I don't think there's any risk, but they do feel uneasy having to rely on agricultural use for their water.
Other questions from committee
Mr.
members?
Chairman, this is Mark.
Go ahead, Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you. I guess I'm a little interested in the discussion where we were discussing the costs per acre foot and the fact that $14 per acre foot seemed to be too high. A little more information on the cost structure if I could get that. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to tackle that, and I think maybe the place to start would be, because what Phil was talking about is, of course, rental for that particular season, but maybe talk about what we understand, and we did talk with the Bureau about the cost of the space. Once you get through all of the environmental work and you're able to actually enter into a contract, what the cost of the storage would be. And Ron, do you want to talk about that?
The previous contracts that were awarded in the Payette were construction costs. That was award. The first contracts were giving out, I believe, in 1964, and the cost per acre foot was $11.60 an acre foot. That was to cover construction costs, and that was given on a 40-year contract with no interest for the payoff. And about 20 years later, additional contracts were let out. The contracts were written at that same price, $11.60, at no interest, but the term of the contract was only 10 years at that point. And so we're not certain of this, but we kind of think that the price is locked in at construction cost. So we're thinking that it would still be at that $11.60. We've heard nothing from the Bureau that we think would change that, but we're still up in the air. We're not dead certain about that.
Yeah, this does prompt my recollection that this specific issue came up during the meeting with the Bureau, and they seem to confirm that that's the basis, the construction costs. And then they pivoted to the environmental costs, what it costs to get to the finish line. But the cost of the space itself is reasonable compared to other things, we think. So again, it's already built, it's already authorized, it's already dedicated. It's just a matter of getting through the environmental morass to the finish line, we think. Yeah, Ken.
A couple points I'd like to make. One is that there's really no change of the amount of water that's going to be diverted for irrigation. That would remain absolutely constant. The accounting is what we're trying to solve for. And under the administration, when our water rights for an irrigation company or the individuals sitting around this table, plus many others that are not here, when they fall out of priority date, then they're going to either, number one, have to curtail diversions, or they'll have to rent water from the rental pool. What our concern is it's maybe not the $3.50 per acre rental on an annual basis, or maybe even the $7. But what the risk is when the competitiveness for that rental water comes into play, such as the municipal water company here in the Boise Valley, Veolia, is interested in renting water, and they just randomly threw out a number of $50 per acre foot. And I think from a landowner and an agricultural perspective, that is a huge risk of uncertainty for our operations. And so what we're trying to do is to get a permanent solution, but the diversions of water will remain absolutely the same as they are today. So the point is.
Other
Mr.
committee
Chairman,
member,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I just wondered if there was other committee member questions.
Yeah,
but
Brian, this is
Chance
Jeff.
on it. Go ahead, Mr. Raybould.
I got a few. One that just popped up from an earlier question. When you're calculating how many acre feet the cities need or the irrigators need, and you're saying you could do that all with this 16,000 and change of space, what's the reliability of fill for this space? Is it going to fill every year, or are you going to not have a full allocation every year? And have you taken that into consideration when you talk about how much the cities need and the irrigators need?
I think the Payette has one of the best refill or fill reliabilities in the state. We seem to miss a fill about once every 20 years. Ironically, we missed filling in 2001, and missed again in 2021. Other than that, we filled very reliably through there. And even those were kind of close calls. We didn't miss the fill too far. In my calculations, until we have experience with water accounting, we're not really certain what the usage is going to be. But most of these water rights will have a portion of the year where they operate off of natural flow, and that's one of the big features of the Payette Basin is that a lot of our water is natural flow water. Also, we do have a bit of a cushion because the in-basin takes priority over the out-of-basin, and on a short year when we do not fill, then of course we regroup and refigure, and we go through a process to where we do not extend ourselves beyond the point of being able to handle the in-basin use by renting or leasing water to the Bureau of Reclamation for flow augmentation. There is a pretty good cushion there to work on. So I do believe that we would be able to cover all of the in-basin use, even on the shortest years that we have experienced probably within the last 40 years. But of course, we are reliant upon storage water, but less reliant than most other basins.
Okay, Brian, follow up. Ken indicated that the need for this is because administration is moving into the upper Payette. So if you are curtailed on your natural flow rights, that water is going to go to other water right holders in the Payette system that have rights senior to these rights of this association. And then is that going to require them to use less of their storage water?
That is the case. This tributary water would be mitigation, and it would be a shifting of whose water was actually consumed by the diversion. At the point right now, it's causing the downstream water users to consume more storage, and by having the storage in the ownership of the upper part of the basin, then they would be using out of their own account. And you are correct, that would be releasing water, making it more available by reducing their reliance upon stored water.
Okay, and then lastly, has the Bureau ever relied on this 16,700 acre feet of storage to meet the flow aug target? Have they ever
Not
had
to my
utilize
knowledge.
that? So that's just been
No.
sitting there and never been tapped.
The best of my knowledge, that is correct, that they have not gotten into that through my career anyway.
And then one other thought, Norm said earlier that maybe stage one would be to go after this 16,700, and then stage two would be to go after the 22,000 in Deadwood. If we're going to go out and spend a whole bunch of money, would it make sense to take a bigger bite of this elephant and do it all at once and only have to do all the environmental studies one time instead of having to do them twice?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Regardless of what the proposed action, the contracting action ends up being, or whether it's staged or whatever, I think absolutely that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you.
Just a portion.
Other questions from committee members?
Mr. Chairman, I had one more that brought up on this, Joanne's questions about the municipal users. Are they going to have to pay the municipal rates to buy space from reclamation as opposed to irrigation rates?
Yes. That did come up during the meeting, and that's absolutely correct, yeah.
So would they, maybe this is too many weeds, but would they have to have a separate agreement with the cities, separate from the Water Users Association?
Yeah, we don't know that, and I don't pretend to know the details of how the Anderson thing is structured. There's some municipals in there, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that would be weeds to get through. Honestly, if the board becomes interested in pursuing this opportunity, which I think it's just, I see a big pie, which is the Payette project, and I see a certain slice of the pie is only so big right now, contracted water that's available to meet demands and needs in the basin. And this provides an ability to make that slice of pie a little bit bigger and usable for the state and for the residents and the folks there. So if we go that route, I don't know what the structure becomes, contract to subcontract, the subcontract's an umbrella group, or if it's individual users, municipalities and individuals, or a combination, maybe an umbrella group for the irrigators and municipalities separately. I don't know, but I sure would like the opportunity to try to work through that.
Well, Brian, this is Jeff. As I understand from a previous conversation and then again today, your association's preference would be to have the water board take the lead, fund the cost related to acquiring the space, and then enter into some sort of a long-term agreement to allow the association to use at least the amount of the space that they needed to meet their needs.
That's correct. We think you guys are a lot better elephant eaters than we are, but we want to help. We want to do whatever we can to help make this happen.
So, go ahead. Mr. Chairman, I do have one more question based on that question from Jeff, if I could, and that is, what would your thoughts be about the water board acquiring a contract with the reclamation and then having basically a separate agreement with the upper Payette water users?
We have talked that exact scenario since our initial meeting with Brian Patton, and our folks seem to be very comfortable with that idea.
Mr. Chairman, you do have some other water board members on the Zoom meeting that are not members of the storage committee.
Okay, any questions from other board members?
Chairman.
Recognize Pat McMahon. Go ahead.
Pat, you're muted.
You've got the floor, Pat. He might be having internet.
He's muted, Mr. Chairman.
Oh. Pat,
While Pat's working through his
can you
technical
hear us?
problem, Mr. Chairman, is there a timeline? Is this like something we need to start on yesterday, or Or when have we got to get back to reclamation with a plan?
There is no set timeline. It is pretty urgent because the train's on the tracks. We can see it coming. But obviously the board's got to move at the speed that it moves at and is comfortable. But there's not a particular deadline. Now, I do want to say the administration's coming, and I don't know if you guys want to speculate on when that storage is absolutely necessary, but it is coming up, right?
Yeah, they're hoping to move, the stages as quickly as they can. They've estimated a couple of years to bring the tributaries in. So I think that's the timeline we should look at right now.
Given how long it takes the federal government to act, probably sooner is better than later.
Chairman has just a couple of questions. I'll just ask them both at once, probably for Ron. One, so as these tributaries have been brought into administration, does that mean that there will be a good measurement on all these natural flow diversions? And I guess two, then, with this new storage acquisition, can the new storage holders carry that storage over? And also, can they rent that storage water to the BOR for FlowAug or to other irrigators?
The intention is, yes, to have good measurement, and I think that is what's going to determine the speed of how long it takes to bring these tributaries in, is how fast that measurement can be placed on it. The PAED is very used to having telemetered data brought in, and so I'm thinking that they're probably going to move it in at the speed that they can add the telemetered data to come in. As far as them being able to rent storage out, I'm not really certain that would be a possibility. It's a little bit different situation where they are. I think we're playing the numbers a little bit closer. A tributary is a little bit different. A lot of these are above the reservoir, so it's a mitigation situation. And on years, on short water years, they'll probably use less water than they will on good water years, because their tributary will fizzle out before the end of the season, and they'll end up with a shorter season, less time to use water that would have gone downstream. On short water or on short water years, you can see that they would be using less, and on long water years. So it's a little bit different game. And that's one of the reasons why I think the association is very valuable, because we can add a lot of flexibility. Each tributary is going to be a little bit different critter, and so we won't know exactly how to go at it until we've had experience. But as far as whether they'll be able to rent water if unused, I'm not really certain about that. I think it would take experience before we could figure that out. But where the benefit will come is that we will, reduce the competition for flow augmentation water, which will free up a little bit of water. We should end up even better than a net zero as far as impact to flow augmentation water, but I don't think it's going to be huge. It's probably not going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. In other words, if we acquire 16,700, that doesn't mean that it's going to free up 16,000 acre feet water that could be then applied to flow augmentation, because I don't believe it's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio there. But it would actually be better than it would be a positive rather than a negative, and even better than a net zero impact on flow augmentation.
Thank you, Ron. Pat McMahon, I'll recognize you now if you're back online.
I didn't have anything, Brian.
Oh, okay. I guess any other questions, or Brian Patton, what's our next move?
Mr. Chairman, if there's no further questions from water board members, I do have perhaps a couple of actions that the storage committee may may wish to consider in relation to this item. First, the storage committee may want to recommend to the full board that this item be added to the regional water sustainability projects priority list. Second, this committee may wish to recommend that the finance committee budget for this project, perhaps a placeholder amount of $1 million for now that can be adjusted later on as we know more. And third, perhaps this committee may direct staff to begin discussions with the various parties that have an interest in this proposal, including but certainly not limited to this association of potential upper Payette Basin storage water users, including both the irrigators and the cities, the Payette River Water Master and Water District 65 Advisory Committee, and the Bureau of Reclamation. And then further direct staff to bring back to the committee a report of these discussions, any issues that are identified, and see what might be the best path to try and achieve the desired outcome.
Okay, committee members, on that first item then, discussion on putting this upper Payette on the priority list for projects. Regional sustainability.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Ms. Cole-Hansen.
I move that we add this project to the regional sustainability list,
I would second that.
or make a recommendation to the full board to add it to the regional sustainability list. Sorry.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Okay, we're going to vote then on, I would be to put this project on the regional sustainability list. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Budget some money for this project. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question about where the money might come from. Will this be budgeted in our, actually, it's a question from Mr. Patton.
Mr. Chairman, Joanne, at this point, yeah, we would be adding this to our spending plan that we'll be talking to you about when the finance committee convenes. My initial thought is from the water management account. As I've been sitting here thinking about this, however, I'm wondering whether this might be an ARPA eligible project. So we'll have to do a little more homework on our side and see whether if it is an ARPA eligible project, and if that's, where we might want to draw the funds from, or whether we do just want to draw it from the state appropriations in the water management account.
So I guess I'd look for a motion to move this, to recommend this to the finance committee and let.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mark. I think if we're going to put it on the sustainability list, we probably ought to also earmark some funds for it. So I would make that motion that staff determines where the most appropriate money comes from when we earmark $1 million for this project.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that, but why don't we leave that $1 million blank? Why don't we just leave that to the good judgment of the finance committee to set that amount when they go through the budgeting process?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Raybould.
I would amend my motion.
Okay.
Just like that.
Okay, so did you second that then, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second then to recommend this to the Finance Committee to budget for this project. And we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Chairman votes aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. And the third, then, Brian, do we need a motion to direct you staff to get to work on this, or can we just tell you to?
Mr. Chairman, I think your direction will be sufficient.
Okay. I direct you
Mr.
to
Chairman,
take-
we probably need to get this in front of the board and make sure the board, as a full board, is agreeable to what we're proposing here. And then staff, I think, can begin to do what they need to do.
Okay, we'll take this to the full board then in 2 weeks and assign staff at that point then. Is that good, Brian?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we're going to move on to other items.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
I know
Chairman.
we have Jay Barlow. Oh, sorry.
I just say thank you for your time.
Somebody-
Appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. Thank you all for coming.
We are very
And we'll,
appreciative. Thank you.
We'll get busy. We'll get busy on your project.
Thank you.
Okay, and the other items then,
Just
one thing, Jay Barlow, manager of Twin Falls Canal, contacted me a while back and asked if we could, his board has instructed him to pursue some more storage in the Upper Snake, possibly Minidoka or something else. And he's had communication with the BOR on that. And Mr. Barlow, are you here to chat about that? I saw he was on earlier. Is he still on?
Yes, but he's muted.
We see you, Jay, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you have the floor.
Okay, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this pretty short and sweet. I guess I'll just kind of tell you the story that has gone on around here. Certainly, you know, with the water supply shortages that we've all experienced in the Upper Snake, it created a conversation amongst my board of directors here about a year ago. And the conversation really revolved around looking for other opportunities or some additional storage opportunities in the Upper Snake Basin. Certainly, when you mention that, you know, a lot of topics come up. You know, there was talk about the Minidoka raise a few years ago. There's been some talk about an American Falls raise potentially. There's always talk about the potential of rebuilding Teton. There's some talk about some pump and store facilities. Certainly, all of those projects have got some challenges, some issues. But at the time, we kind of focused in on the Minidoka raise. We had kind of we thought that we had been told that essentially that project was almost shovel ready. There were still some issues to resolve and some challenges to overcome, but nonetheless, there'd been a lot of engineering done on it, and it was pretty well ready to go, and then somehow got put on the back shelf. So I got a hold of the Bureau. And my chairman, Roger Blass, and I scheduled a meeting with the Bureau of Reclamation over in the Hebron office. And we met with them. They put a really good group together. They were very accommodating. And we visited for quite some time. And we learned that in fact, the Minidoka raise was far from shovel ready. They had done a bit of work on it, but it was far from shovel ready. There were some issues to be resolved. Certainly the freeway issue was one of them that we believe has been resolved at this point. There's some wildlife habitat issues that need to be discussed and resolved. There are, I'm sure, a multitude of other issues, but you know, the thought in the mind of our board was There are always going to be challenges. There are always going to be issues. But those challenges and those issues, and of course the cost, are not going to get any smaller as time moves on. And if we're going to look at these things seriously, we need to start looking at them now.
Some financing.
So again, we met with the Bureau, and the Bureau again identified that was a long way from shovel ready, and they suggested to us that the way these projects need to start is with a basin study. So someone needs to apply for a grant with the Bureau of Reclamation to do a basin study on the Upper Snake Basin. And so that seems to make sense. And when you think that through, you realize that that's a big study. So we initially thought, well, maybe what we need to do is try to put together a large collaborative of folks that would be involved in this and be in support of this. And you know, not only would we get more push moving forward with it, but we could help with the funding a little bit. We found that it's a bit of a tar baby. Everyone, I think, wants to hold the baby, but nobody wants to get any of the tar on them as far as the cost of what this basin study may be. So I got a letter from the Bureau of Reclamation here on the 26th of last month, requesting letters of interest for basin studies. And it occurs to me, and we thought that maybe the appropriate thing to do would be to talk to the Water Resource Board and see if there was a possibility that they could initiate a basin study on behalf of all of the water users in Idaho. And again, I believe everybody wants to hold this baby, but there is a significant amount of tar associated with it. So that's the short, sweet story from me.
Okay, I'll open the floor to questions from committee members to Jay.
Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Barker.
Jay, couple questions. Not to be dense, but what the hell is a basin study? And we have been studying the Upper Snake Basin for 50 years. So what are they going to do different than what we've already know about the Upper Snake, and what's it going to cost us?
Well, I would say that it probably wasn't word for word, but that's close to what I asked them, I think. Certainly, I think they're going to look at opportunities for other storage, and of course, the raise of Minnetonka and the raise of Anderson, and look at those challenges and those issues that we're going to have to overcome. And in the end, you know, I told them, you know, if I'm going to go put together a collaborative, I need to have some kind of an idea of how much this is going to cost. And I had hoped that maybe they could give me kind of a rough number, but I have not heard back from them. That's not pointing a finger at them either. I have not chased them on it either. But I can only assume that it's going to be a pretty big number. These grants that they have through the Bureau are 50-50 cost share grants. And so, yeah, that's just for the study. So I assume that we're talking about a significant amount of money.
Millions?
That's where I would guess, yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jeff. Brian, maybe you can help me remember. We took some funding that we were initially going to study rebuilding the Teton Dam with several years ago, and did a basin study of the Henry's Fork Basin. And it seemed to me like that was right at $1 million or a little more for our share of that.
I believe you're correct, Mr. Chairman.
So we have that study complete. I'm sure if you initiated an Upper Snake Basin study, you would probably have to go in and make some revisions to that Henry's Fork portion of the basin. But that part's done. So I don't know, but I'm guessing that it's going to be a fairly expensive process. And did they give you a timeline, Jay? I'm thinking it took us the better part of 2 years to do the one in the Henry's Fork Basin.
They didn't, no, not really, other than to say that it's no small task, and yeah, it's gonna be time consuming. There was a new fellow there that had just started with them who had been involved in a basin study up on the Columbia in some area up there, and he was fairly familiar with it. And yeah, he suggested that it was no small task at all. And certainly just the size of the Upper Snake Basin, when you look at the cost of the one that you alluded to earlier, yeah, it's not going to be a cheap one, I don't think.
So Jay, this is Mr. Chairman. So they aren't looking at the entire Snake River Basin study, then just above Minidoka Dam?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much our focus as we talked with them, was pretty much just the Upper Snake and above Minidoka.
And has the maybe Jeff knows, did the South Fork ever have a basin study? Probably not since Palisades, or
I'm not aware of any other studies in the Upper Snake other than Reclamation came back to us and said, why don't you just take your money and do a basin study instead of just a focus study on rebuilding Teton, and we'll cost share the whole thing with you. So that was the decision that was made at the time. And that's been a while since we did that.
So Brian Patton, do you see a possible path forward on this, or what's your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I do see a possible path forward if the Water Resource Board wants to pursue this. I would want to have a few more conversations with folks. But I do think there could be a path forward. Maybe it's something that you want to think about and make a decision here in a couple of weeks, or geez, Jay, I can't remember the timeline that they included in that letter. But maybe it's something the board wants to consider and make a decision within the timeline of that letter. After you have a chance to think about it and talk with other potentially interested parties.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jeff. Back to Al's original statement. What additional information do we think we could glean from a 2-year study? Would we be better off, instead of paying for half of a 2-year study and then starting on something else for Minidoka, would we be better off just to come up with our own study? You're going to have to involve the Bureau in doing it, but instead of getting it at half price for a study and then potentially a half price for a feasibility study for Minidoka after that, would we be better off just taking money and going and doing a really good study on Minidoka and seeing what the potential on Minidoka is, and short-circuiting the long timeline associated with doing a basin study and then having to start over with where we think we want to focus our attention today?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mark. What is the potential increase in storage considered in this Minidoka raise?
Do you have the answer to that, Jay?
It sticks in my mind that they had talked about 30,000 acre foot with a 5-foot raise.
Mr. Chairman, it was 50,000 acre feet with a 5-foot raise.
Yeah,
that's right. I think it was 10,000 a foot.
Yeah, I think the document that I shared, I think to most of the committee members anyway, was 5-foot raise, 50,000 acre feet, and roughly 250 million. I don't know if that was, no, that was 2010. So the new rebuild of Minidoka Dam was not done yet. I don't know how much of that 250 million might have been covered in that, but I think, of course, costs have increased a lot. So I'm fine with, if we can glean some good information from study, but I always, just every time we look at new storage, it always comes back to me that probably that aquifer is the best storage to put our money into. But if the study can help us with, the Port Neuf, with recharge, with, understanding a lot of other things, possible other sites or pump storage, then that might be valuable to just, I have a hard time seeing the Minidoka raise ever happening, but that's just chairman's opinion.
Mr. Chair, this is Joanne.
Go ahead, Joanne.
That was one of my questions, is that how much of this additional storage would take away from our recharge efforts? If it's filling an additional 50,000 acre feet in Minidoka, would that mean that we would have less water available for recharge?
I'll give that one to Brian Patton.
Mr. Chairman, in the driest years, yeah, that's a third, or Joanne, that's a third of the water that you have available for recharge in those very driest years.
Well, let's talk about that for just a second. It would depend on whether or not the board chose to defer filling this storage versus doing recharge, because our recharge rights would have a priority that would be senior to this new storage right.
But Jeff, haven't we already said we were going to do that, or at least to existing storage? We're going to defer.
Well, existing storage, yeah, we defer to fill existing storage. So I think that would be a big question we would have to answer.
Good point.
So maybe Jay, to put the monkey on your back again, in light of the chairman's comments, what's your thoughts? What's Twin Falls' thoughts about how important this raise would be to your water supply?
Well, I think our thoughts at the time and currently are, it was all worth talking about. It was all worth looking into. I don't know that we've gone very, very far past the conversational portion of this. Certainly there are some issues and challenges and questions that need to be answered as far as priority of fill and those kinds of things. But certainly from a water supply perspective, if there are opportunities out there to create or find more storage opportunities that could help our water supply situation, we thought it was worth looking into.
So, Mr. Chairman, Brian, what would it take for us to look into this arrangement with Reclamation for the water supply study, or the Upper Snake water supply study?
I think we could, Mr. Chairman, I think we could have some conversations with Reclamation and see if, following up on Jay's conversations, and see what they're thinking, see what kind of scope they'd be looking at to try and study. One of the things, thinking back to that Henry's Fork study, they wanted to look at everything that anybody had ever thought of, including a lot of things that, were already in play to try and solve a lot of the water supply challenges. That's something that I think we could follow up with them on, figure out what their timeline is, what their scope is, and take it from there. At this point, what Reclamation is requesting is letters of interest. So I don't think submitting a letter of interest will commit us to anything at this point.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jay again.
Go ahead, Jay.
I believe that was kind of the hang up in me getting any kind of a cost analysis of it. I think they pretty much suggested that they need at least a letter of interest, and they need to know that somebody really wants to do this before they're going to expend the time involved in even putting together an estimate on a project that's likely as large as it is.
So I guess my question then, are we looking for a letter of interest for this Upper Basin study, or for the Upper Basin study as it pertains to raise of Minidoka Dam? Jeff, do you
Well, I
have an
think their
idea?
suggestion, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just wondering what Jeff kind of suggested combining them if.
Well, I just don't want to get bogged down in a long process that only gets us back to pursuing Jay's idea only 3 years later. But I think I got the same letter. I don't think you're unique, Jay. I think everybody and their brother got a copy of that request for proposals from Reclamation. And what's the timeline? When's the deadline just to submit? Yeah, we're interested. We want to talk to you. When's that date? Is that like in June?
Yeah, I see a June 21st date on it. Yep.
Yeah. So maybe what we need to do is give the board just a little bit of time to digest that, and maybe it might be a good idea just to submit a response to Reclamation that, yeah, we'd be interested in doing that. And then we could find out all the nuts and bolts if we were selected. I suppose we don't have to pursue it if we find out it's going to cost multi-millions of dollars and take forever to complete. We're not committed to doing a study, but we'll just get our foot in the door in case we decided that was the best approach as we get more information.
So do we have time then, Jeff, to take this to the full board in 3 weeks? And
well, I think that's all we can do. And Brian can correct me, Brian Patton, but it's not an agenda item on this agenda. So I think all we can do is relay this idea and the conversation that we've had in your committee, Brian, to the full board at the next board meeting, and see what the appetite of the full board is to move forward or not.
Okay, Jay, I think that's what we'll do. We'll put that tar monkey back on your back for a couple of weeks, and we'll from Sandpoint.
Thank you all very much.
I think his internet froze.
Well, yeah, Brian's been cutting in and out. His audio's been breaking up, so
yeah.
I'll maybe do us all a favor. Is there any other non-action items or other business that any of the board or committee members want to take up? Not hearing any. Brian, are you back?
Internet failed for a minute. Can you hear me again now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So did we decide to discuss it at the full board meeting in a couple of weeks then?
Yes, we can put it on that agenda.
Okay, then I guess we're on to any other business.
We're all pretty quiet. I'll make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded that we adjourn this meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Okay, thanks, everybody. See you in a couple hours.
Okay.